Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Ichon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications.
Happy reopening of California, Ro.
So this week is the great reopening of the Golden State. It's tomorrow. We're taping this on a Monday. So PRI is also set to come back to the office. I got to tell you, Tim, the state requirements to reopen were enough to drive anyone crazy. I spent a good part of last week trying to sort it out. You did too. First, we had to provide N95 masks, then employees could wear any mask. And now unvaccinated people don't have to wear a mask at all. So it was so confusing and changing every day. So here at PRI, now we've pretty much bought every kind of mask you can imagine at PRI. We've got N95s, we've got KN95s. My brother gave me a box of surgical masks for the office because he's got a pediatric clinic. And we even have cloth masks that have the PRI logo on it. So we're all ready for the next pandemic.
I spent all day Friday at the office double checking. Everybody has wipes and masks and hand sanitizing spray and all of that. So if we're not ready now, I don't know when we will ever be ready. And the issue about the confusion, it's still ongoing. OSHA put out these regulations. Then there was a lot of criticism of them. Then they took them back. And now they have this new set of regulations that pretty much will align with what the governor's executive order for starting on June 15th will be, but it won't be adopted until later this week, and it won't take effect until June 28th. So a lot of people are still kind of scratching their heads. And Gavin Newsom has a strange hands-off approach to all of this.
Right. I noticed that he hasn't shown a lot of leadership. He sort of let the various agencies duke it out.
And I don't know if it's a union thing or what, but I think it's just crying out for leadership here. Take action and end any confusion.
So I thought it'd be a good idea to give kind of a little state of the state as we reopen. And looks like it's 452 days we've been shut down, according to Jonathan Lansner of the Southern California News Group. He's one of the best business reporters, been around for years. I think he's a terrific reporter. Unemployment rate in California is 7.7%. That's 2.2% higher than the nation's average. We're still down about 1.4 million workers since the COVID restrictions began. In San Francisco, 16.7% of the offices are still vacant, and that compares to about 5% at the end of 2019. The price of an existing single-family home now, the median price is $814,000 as of April. That's up 40% from February. Gas prices are now on average $4.08. That's $1.44 above the pandemic low. And we've talked about this. There's major crime everywhere, especially an increase in homicides and shootings in our major cities. If listeners missed Anne-Marie Schubert, a Sacramento DA interview on last week's podcast, we're getting rave reviews. So please have a listen. It was a very informative podcast. And on top of that, Tim, we're facing another serious drought, and wildfire season is coming upon us. So the state is in pretty bad shape.
It was interesting on the closure issue. The Sacramento Bee had a front page story Sunday about K Street, which for those who aren't familiar with Sacramento, that's kind of like our oft overlooked but oft talked about downtown thoroughfare. It leads up to they reintroduced car traffic, but it's basically like a pedestrian street, and it leads up to our new arena, the Golden One Center. And they spent over $1 billion of public-private funds trying to revitalize K Street, which has long been a home of homeless people and kind of sketchy activity. And just when things were going well in 2020, the rug was pulled out from underneath them. And there was an editorial that accompanied that story saying, we need to order people to go back to work for the health of our economy, Sacramento's economy, and to keep K Street back on track. It really is true, where I think everyone is overjoyed to be able to go back to normal a little bit here, but there's a lot of problems we're facing as we emerge from our COVID shelters here.
So the legislature is set to vote on the budget tomorrow. What's happening with that, Tim?
They're actually voting on it today. And it's really, sadly, just about getting a paycheck. Under a voter proposition approved several years back to switch to a majority vote budget, you have to pass the budget by June 15th or else lawmakers don't get a paycheck. So lawmakers, as of this taping on Monday morning, still have not reached a deal with Governor Newsom. So they're essentially passing their own plan that they agree with themselves on. And by they, I mean the Democrats in the legislature, just to say, we passed the budget. So they've technically met the requirements of that proposition, but don't be fooled. This is not the final budget deal. Someone once told me it's often harder to pass a budget when there's a lot of money to spend than it is when you have tough times and have to make cuts, and kind of proving itself here. Who knows when we'll get a budget deal? It has to happen before June 30th or else the state will go insolvent. But how they do it procedurally, whatever deal that they cut with Governor Newsom, they'll pass a second bill that contains all the changes to the main budget act. So, of course, one of the deals that's already been agreed to is that they will appropriate the money to hold the recall election. They'll also waive the requirements so we could schedule the recall earlier, which theoretically is better for Governor Newsom. So an interesting few budget days ahead.
So you think we can expect a recall vote as early as September? Is that right?
Could even be in August.
Wow. Well, talked about California here, and we've got a very special guest this upcoming podcast, Debra Saunders, who's here to give us her insight on what's happening in California. As many of our listeners know, she was the longtime columnist of the San Francisco Chronicle, but she left California to cover the Trump White House beat for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and now she's at the Discovery Institute. So we chat with Debra about what it's like to cover Donald Trump at the White House as a member of the White House press corps, what she now thinks about California now that she's living back east. I thought it was very interesting, her thoughts on her former residence.
She was a media voice you heard all the time when she was in California working at the Chronicle. And it's really just great to hear her again and hear her perspective on having a front row seat in a very interesting time in our nation's political history.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Here's Debra Saunders. Welcome to PRI's Next Round podcast, Debra.
Thank you, Rowena. How are you?
Fine, thank you. So we're so pleased that you could join us this week on Next Round. All your friends from California are interested to know what's going on with you after leaving the White House beat. So tell us about your new work with the Discovery Institute and how our listeners can stay in touch with what you're doing.
Thank you for asking that. That's a great question. So I'm a fellow with the Discovery Institute, and I'm with the Chapman Center for Citizen Leadership, which is part of it. Bruce Chapman founded it. And I get to look at issues and I write about them. I still write a weekly column. You can find it at creators.com or discovery.org or spectator.org for the American Spectator. Those are places where you can find my work. It's been a nice change for me after the burnout White House beat for 4+ years. And I'm walking my dog a lot.
So before your tenure covering the Trump administration in the White House, all your fans in California remember you as a longtime columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. So what do you miss the most about not being in the Golden State or writing for the Chronicle any longer?
I miss Wente and Fenestra, my two favorite wineries to go, to go in the afternoon. I miss the readers. I wrote for the Chronicle for 24 years, and you really have the readers in your head when you're writing for a paper like that. Writing is a very public act. A columnist doesn't sit around in anguish. A reporter doesn't. You're out in public, reporting on what you're seeing. You're opining. You're dealing with readers, and so I really miss the folks who read me in the Chronicle. And it was a good relationship, sometimes trying, but always challenging. And that's good. You want people to challenge you.
So you, as you say, recently completed a tour of duty as White House correspondent for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. So during that time, you had a pretty good seat as an eyewitness to history in perhaps one of the most challenging 4 years in recent times. Share with our listeners a few takeaways from your time covering the White House. And as a journalist, what lessons did you learn covering such an important beat every day while still balancing the demands of writing your weekly column?
The White House is a gilded cage of a beat. On the one hand, it's the highest profile story in the world, and you've got a seat, and it's amazing to be there. On the other hand, in my case, I was a one-person bureau. So I'm trying to keep up with what's going on with the White House with Nevada. If something's coming up, also doing stories of the day, not always sure what your editors want at a given time. And so you're always sort of watching all the time. You have to make sure you don't miss anything. You really don't want to miss a story that affects your newspaper's readers. And it's a very competitive environment, but it's also pretty collegial. And I'll tell you why. So you've watched the briefings. There are 49 seats, right? When I started covering the White House and Donald Trump's president, and I'm there from the very beginning, and that briefing room was crazy. I mean, they were just jockeying for a place to stand. I wasn't near having a seat, right? And everyone sort of elbowing each other and trying to get their questions in. But so how do you get a seat there? Well, you have to have it. It's assigned to you through the White House Correspondents Association. And why do they have the power? Well, otherwise it's a total free-for-all, right? You've got 49 seats and a lot of people want them. The sort of people who can get there and spend the whole day there could get those seats, but they're not necessarily the best reporters to do it. So there's this balancing act of finding news outlets that have a certain kind of viewership or readership and people who are going to be there and be part of everything. And so they're more likely to get the chairs. It took me close to 2 years to get on, maybe a year, to get on a rotation for a seat. So one of the other things that they do is they'll give certain seats to different news outlets, but then there's a rotation for 10 reporters for, let's say, the middle seat on the fifth row. So that's the kind of thing that you're doing. And, there's an understanding that people have on how to do that. Then comes COVID. And all of a sudden, there's social distancing. The White House Correspondents Association, far more than the Trump administration, had to set up social distancing rules because we didn't want people to get COVID there doing their jobs. And so all of a sudden, you go from having this packed room to 14 seats. Now it's up to 24 because of measures changing, but 14 seats. And I was on a rotation. Actually, with COVID, I seem to have more chances to get in the briefing room and ask questions. And so that's an amazing thing. The downside of the beat is that there are times that you might want to go deeper into something and you may or may not have the opportunity to do it. I was never interested in the soap opera parts of the administration. It was really I was more interested about basically what was going on that affected people in Nevada, people who read my column, which is syndicated. And that basically was where my focus was. People always ask me about certain people who would ask certain kinds of questions. And I'll just say, it's a funny room. And the chances are you're going to end up asking questions everybody thinks are totally stupid from time to time. Questions people think were great questions. And you'll see other people asking something that they need to know for their beat, but not everyone else does. So does that answer it?
Yeah, it was very interesting, frankly.
And it was an interesting time brewing it.
So you had a little bit of overlap in the White House with the new Biden administration. So how did you find covering President Biden's team versus President Trump and working with their respective press teams? And, both from the inside and now from the outside, do you see that there's been a difference in the approach of your former White House press corps colleagues in covering President Biden versus President Trump?
Oh, that's a great way to put that, Tim. So let me just start by saying everybody thought that Biden getting in, he'd be really boring and not as much work. Well, guess what? He's a president. So you may not have the drama that you had with Donald Trump, but with Joe Biden, you get a lot of policies. A new White House comes in, you have to break in the team and they break you in, just as happened to me. So when I started covering the Trump White House, I'd never been a reporter before. I'd been an editorial writer and a columnist. And here I am in this crazy beat. And the Trump people, a lot of really great people in that group and they know who they are. But they also were there to serve Donald Trump. And they felt that was a special thing about Trump. Not all of them necessarily had the kind of background that you're seeing with the Biden people. And the Biden people, they're there to serve Joe Biden, make no mistake about it. And they're going to be very protective of him and loyal to him. But you can also feel that there's a sense of they're representing the institution of the White House as well. And a lot of these folks, like Jen Psaki, they've been in government before. They just have a more professional way of dealing things in terms of a routine. A lot of the people in the Trump orbit, they hadn't done this sort of thing before. And then again, neither had I. So I'm not, I understand that. It made for a big, big difference. So when when Biden won, I got a lot of emails from people saying the press corps better be as tough on Joe Biden as they are on Donald Trump. Well, that's just not going to happen for a bunch of reasons. Liberal bias is one of them. But the other is that the Trump people could be pretty confrontational, and President Trump could be very confrontational. And he would be very, baldly nasty sometimes to people in the press corps. He talked about people's looks, and he could get very personal. Now, Joe Biden, he has his short moments too, and he says things that are, where he slights the press, but it's not the thing he lives for. The other thing is he doesn't look like somebody. He's sort of frail. He's an old guy. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to start yelling? I'm sorry, but you don't have to. The deal is you can ask tough questions, and I see my colleagues do this all the time. They ask tough questions, but without the confrontation. Jim Acosta from CNN, he would show up and, his whole shtick was, I'm going to challenge whoever the press secretary is, and I'm going to, give them something back. Obviously, that made a lot of people distrust the press. I get that. But there's just no percentage in doing that with the Biden White House. You see Peter Doocy from Fox News is one example of someone who sort of talks back. But again, he's respectful. You don't have that personal edge that we saw in the Trump briefings.
So let's talk about some of the key issues that you're writing about. So naturally, turning the corner of the COVID-19 pandemic dominates everything that's going on these days. You recently wrote a great column looking back at how partisan politics has poisoned our national response to COVID-19. Much like the analogy of two Americas, there were clearly two pandemic experiences, largely along red and blue lines between what you call the New York Times America of people who were largely adapted to lockdown, and the other America where lockdowns ended long ago and most have returned to their normal lives. So having covered it every day, what one or two key moments or actions by government leaders stand out to you? And do you think some of the words or actions by government officials during the pandemic may have fundamentally diminished people's faith in their government leaders or their willingness to even follow their guidelines during a time of crisis?
So imagine you're in the Trump White House and then a global pandemic hits. It was amazing. And I remember the first press conference that they gave on COVID. It was like the last day in January, I think, the briefing. And I had to cover something else. And I went downstairs and listened because I'd been in earlier. And I remember thinking, you're going to remember this, Debra. I had a deadline for something else, but you're going to remember that you missed this. And then as time went on, we had the coronavirus task force, White House task force, and we had all these great people coming in and talking to us about it. And I don't know about you all, but I was skeptical about how bad this was going to be and what we'd have to do to deal with it. I think that these hearings really help people process what was happening and understand it. The truth is, people like Deborah Birx and Dr. Fauci and Steve Hahn from a lot of great professionals, they didn't know what it was either. They were dealing with something new. A lot of people give them a hard time because they said don't wear masks at one point, and then they said to wear them, but they didn't know. So in a way, we all went through this learning process together. Unfortunately, I think that Trump made it too much about him, and I think that turned people off, that the circus element. And I think that he didn't like sharing the stage, and he didn't like letting the task force star. And I think that was a problem with him. And the whole mask issue with Donald Trump. During COVID, I interviewed Donald Trump in an enclosed area for a rally in Las Vegas. So I was very personally aware of what happened. I never got COVID to my knowledge. There was all these debates about should he wear a mask, should he not wear a mask? And if, that was a debate that really went on last spring in a way that some people may not remember. I do think that Trump, and I think that he made it so much about him that a lot of people felt they had to overcorrect. And I look at the mask issue as one where, because Trump didn't like to wear a mask, then people were going to show that they were virtuous by wearing masks, even when they didn't have to. And you look at Joe Biden, he was vaccinated before he was sworn into office. He never really had to wear a mask. And you didn't really see the White House ditching the mask until basically most of America, and I'm not talking about California, had done so. California, I just find to be so different from other places in this country where they took it seriously during the 15 days and then 30 days to slow the spread. If they were not essential workers, they followed that. But after that, they went out and they did things. And I walked my dog all the time. I carried a mask with me. I only put it on when I had to be near people, because it was really clear for me sitting in those meetings that if you're outside and you're not, close contact with a group of people, you don't need to wear one. And I just sort of feel that the virtue signaling that got into the mask thing just got so out of hand. And by the way, I wore a mask on planes. I wore a mask in the briefing room, where, I did it, but there were times I didn't necessarily think it was necessary. So, and by the way, I was there when the night Trump came back from the hospital. That was amazing. And of course, his refusal to wear a mask was much commented on. I should also mention, everyone was relying on the tests then. Well, you can test negative one day and positive the next. And so there was a lot of criticism for him on it, which of course always made him dig in his heels more. That day he came back from the hospital, he'd had COVID. He was in a hospital and he walked up the stairs of the South Pavilion. And it was amazing that he was able to do that.
So it seems like communication, whether from government sources or media voices or folks on social media, really has been a main contributor to a lot of this division or confusion or whatever however you want to characterize it today. So now that we're kind of turning the corner on COVID, how do we move on from this and hopefully move forward to rebuild a sense of community or unity that we're obviously lacking today, and kind of lower this political temperature we've seen in recent years?
So, Tim, I was an essential worker. So I went out during the whole thing and I did my job. I didn't go into the White House every day because of social distancing policies, but I was out there. And there were a lot of people who were out there. And I think the majority of Americans were out there a lot more than a lot of the Californians I talked to. And I think that there's going to be a realization at some point in time. You'd turn on CNN during all this and they'd make fun of all these people who didn't want to wear masks, like what rubes they were, how stupid they were. And as I said, when you're in an enclosed area, I wore a mask. It was the right thing to do. I would do it again. At the same time, public schools across America shut down. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And the CDC never said to shut down the schools. It said that if there was a high instance of COVID in the area, or somebody had come into the campus who had it, they should take something like 2 to 5 days to sterilize, clean everything, and then let people go back. So that was a complete overreaction. And it was a panic, just a moral panic where everybody had to shut things down. And you have these two different Americas. So as I said, I've seen plenty of people from the America where everybody wears masks and makes fun of everybody for being so stupid for not wearing them. But these folks, I don't know, is it really safe to not have your kid go to school for a year and a half? Is that good for your kid's health? I don't think so, unless your child has a health problem or someone in your family does. So I think that we're going to continue with this, but I do wonder if, and I know Californians have really been locked down, what are you going to do when you get out in the world and see how other people have been living?
Right. Well, we know you're not here in California anymore, but you're certainly following California's politics. So what are your thoughts on the recall campaign against Governor Newsom and this political circus that's about to descend on the state? And how do you compare it to when you covered the recall of Gray Davis?
Yeah, Gray Davis was not a well-loved figure, and whether Gavin Newsom is or not, I will leave to you, since you've been living under him as governor. I think that the Democratic Party understands that if Newsom doesn't make it, there's talk, do they have another Democrat to run or not? And I don't know how they'll end up deciding that one. I look at Caitlyn Jenner, Kevin Faulconer, John Cox. These are people whose names are out there. Probably the only way any one of them could win, if they could win, would be through a recall. So that's the advantage that you have from it. But I have to tell you, I guess after you've seen one, you're not necessarily anxious for another, because it is better when people try to work together. But if I were a Californian, I would vote for the recall just to pay back Gavin Newsom for closing schools. I don't understand that. And I know Californians think it's okay, but I don't know how they're going to feel by the time the recall happens. We'll see.
I think it's interesting too, remembering 2003, we really had seen nothing like that in California, of course, with Arnold running. I remember there was a rally at the Capitol a few days before the election. I'd never seen a rock star treatment at a political rally like that. And this recall, it's boring by comparison. People may have short memories, but 2003 was, something I don't think we'll ever see again.
Yeah, we'll see.
One of the things that we've been noticing at PRI, and we're starting to do some work on this, is that California really does drive the national conversation, but it can cut both ways, right? To some, you see actions like the move to rename San Francisco's public schools while schools are still shut down during the pandemic as something that makes us a national laughingstock. But then you see the Biden administration is looking to Sacramento for all sorts of progressive policies like green subsidies and crime policy and homelessness. So what's the Beltway view of what's going on in California? And should we all be getting out our bullhorns and warning the rest of America that the worst excesses of California will soon be spreading east?
I just don't see people paying attention to other states in Washington. I always thought of California as having this size influence on California politics, and obviously it does. We have the vice president from California, right? We've got a speaker from California. Obviously California looms large. I don't see people looking to California for policy a whole lot. I certainly wouldn't look to California for homeless policy. I don't know that I would look to California for a lot of things. Now, I get Biden is friendly there, but he hasn't been there yet, has he?
I don't think he has.
No, he hasn't traveled much. But again, I just sort of, look at this White House can take California for granted. They've got you. They don't have to work for you.
Right.
They just don't. Trump could ignore California because he couldn't win California. Biden doesn't have to worry. So, basically, you can be taken for granted and you will be.
Although I think President Trump relished coming out during the wildfires and lecturing Governor Newsom and all the local officials about breaking the forests or whatever the topic of discussion was that day.
Yes, he did. And of course, he was friendly with Gavin, too. He liked the fact that they could talk. And you have to give the governor credit for that he understood that there are certain people in politics who would pick fights with Trump to basically play to their base. But Gavin Newsom's too smart for that. He got what he could. And I salute him for that.
I always thought that Trump and Newsom, or actually, if you look at it, they're kind of surprisingly similar people in their own ways.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's true. And that, Kimberly Guilfoyle was married to one and dating the son of another. So they have this odd connection. And Trump gave money to California politicians before he started running.
We forget about that connection. So, Debra, finally, after this great conversation, we've got our favorite question for you. So here at PRI and Next Round, because we're so close to wine country, we love nothing more than discussing public policy with enjoying a glass of wine. And you already mentioned Wenti before the show. So what wine, beer, adult, or otherwise beverage are you enjoying to unwind after 4 stressful years covering the White House?
And I happened to bring a bottle with me because I knew you were looking for it. This is Torre Acona. It's a Chianti. Like it a lot. Highly recommend it. And yeah, I like Wenti and Finestra wines too. But this is what I've got at home. It's uncorked, just in case you're wondering.
Great. Thanks so much, Debra.
Thank you both.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.